Joining me for all the chat, I'd like to say, is Candice Holdsworth. She's a writer and commentator. Candice, just in terms of what we've heard from Rachel Reeves today, we've actually had some substance, as we were expecting. Not just the Chancellor, but the government, she says, backs a third runway at Heathrow Airport. I have been talking about and writing about this third runway at Heathrow Airport ever since I was a political journalist. So I've been talking about, I'm journalist, for 30 years, because I am that old. But I know this has been something that has been talked about since before I was born.
Yeah.
Do you think it's ever going to happen?
Well, I hope so. That, like you say, there's been a huge... You can't just speak these things into action. I'm glad that they are speaking more pragmatically and optimistically and doing all these things that should never have been blocked.
Practical, tangible things.
Yes. But of course, it's all about the execution, how these things will be brought about, who's going to oppose it. I mean, you've got people like Sadiq Khan saying he's going to oppose it.
Yeah.
I wonder what Ed Miliband will say. He's sort of softened his tone a little bit.
Well, basically, he threatened to resign from Gordon Brown's company. And this has been an issue for every government, Labour, Tory, coalition. And we've always got people like Ed, voting, saying that they would resign if it went ahead. Thing is, if he resigned, I've got a funny feeling that Keir Starmer would be quite pleased. I think he's already thinking, why the hell did I give this lunatic a job?
Well, this is the thing. But I just can't believe it. People have been living in fantasy land, in la-la land, as if the world will just wait, as if prosperity, it's just guaranteed. You don't have to do anything for it. Just keep bumbling along. We'll always be one of the world's wealthy economies. Yeah. Meanwhile, you've got countries all over the world. They're just steaming ahead.
Yeah, and people, again, we're constantly told, oh, look how bad we're doing after Brexit. Have you seen what's happening in Germany?
Yes.
Oh my God, Germany's entering its third year of recession, for goodness sake. It's absolute nonsense. Yeah. But it's one interesting thing, some of the lines from what Rachel Reeves had to say. We're talking about how for too long people have been complacent. We've been willing to do this. We've been willing to put up with low growth. We've been willing to, well, maybe you have, love.
Yeah.
I haven't.
No.
I don't think my listeners and my watchers have had. I don't think we've been willing to do that. We've had to put up with it while you lot mess it up. And I completely accept Labour haven't been in power for 14 years. But when they say, oh, we've not built a reservoir since 1992, well, you were in power from 1997 to 2010. And by the way, the economy was booming then. There was spare money. We still had North Sea oil revenue to bank. You know what Norway did with theirs? Set up a wealth fund. Isn't it something like 4% of the wealth in the world is owned by the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, and they're only allowed to spend, I think, 3 or 4% a year because it has to be kept for future generations. So they took that amazing boom from North Sea oil, and they say they've invested. It has to be spent on infrastructure. It can't be spent on day-to-day spending, building roads, building hospitals, building infrastructure. If only we had politicians who thought like that. If only we did.
We did. And Brexit, that was like ordinary people trying to be optimistic about the future and saying, come, we can take our destiny in our own hands and we can plot our own course.
I think we probably need Brussels to help us, don't we?
But this is it, right? It's this sort of wringing hands, we're so useless, we're so hopeless, and it's just awful, and it's no one believes that.
But again, this is it. When they say that is what they think.
Yes,
that is what they think. But also the people saying we should build this stuff now. You voted against this. You have campaigned in your local constituency, in your local paper, against all of the things you now say you want to do. And by the way, the Tories, and we're going to be talking to a Tory guest in a very few minutes. He's the Shadow Housing Secretary, Kevin Holloway. The Tories are just as bad on this. They talked a good game, didn't get anything done in so many years. Yeah, they went through austerity. Yes, we had we've had all of that. But still, the business of doing long-term planning and things needs to be done. By the way, Ed Miliband, the Energy Security and Net Zero Secretary, again, those things are mutually exclusive. He did once threaten back in 2009 to resign over Heathrow expansion when he worked in Gordon Brown's government before he, and again it still blows my mind, before he became Labour leader himself. Still a mind-blowing time, the Ed Stone. When you look back elections, who was the leader of the party? Ed Miliband was actually potentially our Prime Minister at one point. How scary is that? He is not at Rachel Reeves' speech this morning. A lot of the Cabinet are there. Rachel Reeves is speaking right now in Oxfordshire. Ed Miliband apparently has told reporters that his sources close to him said he's busy in meetings today. He's busy trying to kill growth in this country with net zero, while the Chancellor is saying what she wants to do. Interestingly, the Rachel Reeves has been asked today about whether she will commit to cutting net migration, even if it damages economic growth. By the way, by the way, the lie we've been told for years, and it came up in the last hour, this idea that mass levels of net migration and immigration into this country is good for the economy. Well, if it was the last 20 years we've had mass immigration, if it was, we'd be booming by now. We would be Singapore, guys, and we ain't. So that's a bit... that is such a typical question from the mainstream media, even if it damages economic growth.
Yes.
I mean, they never ask that about net zero normally, but she has said we will reduce net migration, she says, but taking back control means having more say of who comes into this country. Yeah, Boris Johnson said that, and we were seeing, 1.2 more million people coming into this country, net migration of, 700, 800,000 a year, more people in the country. The stats we had yesterday were based on an assumption of around 340,000 more people coming to live in the country from abroad than leaving every year. It's been way more than that for years. I know they've made some visa controls that may well bring it down. It's unlikely to be that. Even the projections that by 2032 we'll have a population that is 5 million higher than it was in 2022. If you look at those projections, if you look at the projections from last year, the year before and the year before that, they have been so catastrophically wrong and always in the same direction. They always massively underestimate that growth. I think, as one of our guests pointed out yesterday, we're looking at realistically in the next 10 years, we're having a population of 80 million.
And they're refusing to just grasp the nettle of things like welfare reform. So they're using immigration to plug all those gaps in things like social care, for instance.
Because our people won't do those jobs.
Yeah.
Well, why? Because the wages are so low.
And I've heard Conservative politicians say, well, what are we going to do about the falling birth rate? Where are we going to get future employers from?
Candice can't have babies for everyone. She's churned out 3 people. She's done her bit.
But it's crazy that we're talking about it that right now. Mad. So like my 3 children, or however children you have, they are going to be taxpayers one day. We've got, you actually have to think about things like that. Yeah. New Labour sort of seeded that narrative when they were sort of trying to, they say, rescue industries that couldn't find workers, and they started with mass immigration. Yep. But actually, no, what they should have done is those businesses should have innovated, they should have adapted, is once again interfering in the economy, trying to pick winners. Yeah. And this is what happens.
Yeah, and indeed, and again, the business love mass immigration because they're not paying all the housing costs. We're subsidising their low wages for migrants by paying for everyone's housing benefits and other benefits and paying for higher cost of homes. And, the economics of this are crazy. And I've been talking about this for years and years and years. And of course, everyone just shouts bigot and far right at you. And, but I've been right. Just going back to Heathrow runway, London Mayor Sadiq Khan, never right about anything. London Mayor Sadiq Khan says he remains opposed to the Heathrow runway. He's talked about being involved in legal challenges on this. Again, that's what most of the Labour shadow cabinet would have said, 8 months ago, for goodness sake. So that's going to be a bit of fun to watch, isn't it? I'm going to enjoy that. And it is fascinating to see the front page of the Mail today. Certainly businesses basically saying to government, all right, you're talking about growth, but stop punishing us with anti-growth measures like national insurance rise.
But this is it. Can we please just have a bit of cheer business a little bit. They're talking about themselves. We're going to kickstart growth. We're going to do all of this.
You're not doing anything.
What about people who start businesses, who actually employ people, who make payroll every month? Come on.
But they have no. But that's why they increase national insurance employer contributions. It was a little rinky-dink way of getting out of that. Yes. We won't increase taxes on workers, but it does increase tax on workers. It's a workers' tax. Yes. It just happens to be paid by the employer on the sheet. But it is extraordinary. If they had ever employed anybody, they would understand the extra cost of employing that marginal extra worker. And every time a supermarket or an engineering firm or a shop say, shall we employ an extra person to do that work because we're a bit stretched? Yeah. What is the cost of employing that person versus the benefit to the company and the profit margin?
Absolutely.
And again, there are people on The Apprentice in episode 1. Yes. There are people who win The Apprentice who don't seem to understand this basic stuff. Yeah. But I don't think there's anyone in government understands it, that's for sure. We talked about the NHS a bit earlier, being run by bureaucrats out of ideas. I think we all agreed on that. Let's also talk about what is going on in America. An amazing first week from Donald Trump. I don't agree with everything, but oh my God, I would love some of these measures to happen here. He had announced a freeze on tens and tens of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money in America going out on federal grants and loans to huge number of government agencies. Now, we know that we have exactly the same in the UK. Huge amounts of money are spent on Quango this, Quango that, in administration doing this, doing that. He's basically put a complete freeze on everything. It was due to come into force yesterday. At 5 o'clock, a judge, Lauren Ali Khan, put a freeze on it and said, no, you can't freeze this. Now, there was a lot of concern that people wouldn't get their individual, like food stamps, individual stuff. We were told, no, it's not going to affect individuals. It's not about, if you're getting money from the government to basically pay your basic bills, it's not going to affect you. It's about all these different bodies. There's obviously going to be a massive, court case about this. They're obviously going to take this forward. But there's no doubt at all, the White House, the way that you have that separation of powers, federal budget and everything is effectively under executive control, and the president has executive power.
Yes.
He should be able to do this. But one of the other fascinating things that they've announced is clearly an Elon Musk thing, because he basically did this at Twitter, didn't he, really? They're offering federal workers the chance to take what's called a deferred resignation, i.e. you'll get redundancy money for 8 months. So basically agree to resign now. You're going to get paid through to September. They expect 5 to 10% of federal workforce workers to quit. They reckon that will save them around $100 billion in taxpayers' money. They think that roughly 2 million people will basically be offered this buyout, and like, bye-bye, thank you very much, you're gone. I mean, I'd love us to do this here. My only worry is that good people who can get a job somewhere else will take the redundancy and go and get a job somewhere else, and then you're stuck with the people who are really useless.
Oh, well, that's the thing. The problem is, we sort of have to choose. Are we just going to continue heaping pressure on businesses? So, keep making them fund the cost of everything? Or are we actually going to confront the size of the state?
Yeah.
And Labour haven't done that. They talked about we're making the tough decisions. But what are the tough decisions?
They're not even willing to get people to come back in from sitting on their sofa working.
Yeah, it's like the winter fuel allowance, which is puny in comparison to things like welfare reform. It's the farm tax, which isn't going to raise that much money and could threaten food security, actually. I mean, it's they are not making the tough decisions. The tough decisions is confronting the massive size of the state. And the thing is, like you say, it's not stuff like, very important entitlements in the US that people need. You have to make a choice. Are you going to have borrowing? Are you going to have high taxes? Or are you going to look at cutting this thing, which you said right at the beginning of the programme, is leeching off a lot of this?
Absolutely.